Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution, coming to you on September 16th, 2021, from Contact Radio, with just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. I want to let everybody know I am pre-recording this show. Today is Yom Kippur, or Yom Kippur, and I wish all of my listeners and friends an easy fast, and may you be inscribed in the book of life for the next year. In any case, for those who cannot listen live, please do avail yourself of listening to the archive recording later on today, or later on the 16th, or anytime following. All right, so let me get to my usual housekeeping stuff first, which is that you can listen to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking show anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com, clicking on the banner labeled Radio Show, and if you scroll down, you'll see the most recent show displayed most prominently. But you can also look for archive recordings just in case there's something that you missed and you'd like to listen to, or something that you want to listen to again. Separately, please feel free to follow me on my Facebook page, which is Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, where you can also sign up for my Conversations About Consciousness newsletter as well. And again, I'm offering still my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for listeners for only $99. And this is a reading for those who want to gain greater consciousness about their soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, who would like assistance to move from chaos to clarity in any particular area of your life, whether it be relationships, career, finances, or health, to heal old karmic wounds by learning about your karmic past, which is written in your chart, and then to co-create or begin to co-create your own future success and happiness. Or if you'd like to awaken to your true potential and your highest destiny in this lifetime, which can be connected to past life karma as well. It's easy when you take advantage of my special discounted offer, again, specifically for listeners of this podcast, which is a 1-hour Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. Just shoot me an email at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and book your reading today. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. All right, so let's get into this week's Astro news you can use. And I want to start with the September 16th Virgo Sun quincunx to Jupiter in Aquarius that perfected early on September 16th. Now, the quincunx, which is a 150-degree aspect, represents having to make some kind of adjustment. And the Virgo Sun's about detail-oriented factual information, while Jupiter in Aquarius is about expansion of consciousness about group ideologies. So and I'm going to get political here, but, again, those of you who listen to the show regularly know that I use politics as a way to show that what's happening in the collective is the macrocosm, and that if we understand the macrocosm, we can then filter it down into our individual lives to better understand how these energies are affecting each of us. And of course, how they affect each of us will be determined by whether or not some of these energies, these aspects, these lunations and things like that are affecting particularly sensitive points in our own natal chart, be they planets, angles, or what have you. So I said the sun quincunx Jupiter, and that's an adjustment. So people are adjusting to the expansion of vaccine and mask mandates now required by the federal government in the U.S. that affect a huge number of Americans. Again, Jupiter's expansion, right? Huge number of Americans, large groups, Jupiter and Aquarius. President Biden shocked many with his announcement of sweeping new federal vaccine requirements that affect up to 100 million Americans in an effort to increase COVID-19 vaccinations and to curb the surging Delta variant. And he made that announcement on November 9th as Mercury and Libra waxed towards its quincunx to Uranus and Taurus, which perfected on September 10th. So the expansive rules mandate that all employers with more than 100 workers must be vaccinated or test for the virus weekly, a move that covers about 80 million Americans. You can't get more Jupiter in Aquarius than that, and you also can't get more Saturn in Aquarius than that. And we know that the two of them are still doing their square dance this year until they make their final exact square, Saturn to Saturn to Uranus at the end of December. So, again, this move affects about 80 million Americans, and there's also 17 million workers at health facilities that receive federal Medicare or Medicaid who will also fall under this mandate and will also have to be fully vaccinated. Now, President Biden also signed a pair of executive orders to require vaccination for employees of the executive branch and contractors who do business with the federal government, with no option to test out. That covers several million more workers. So we also have the issue of large groups of people, including, of course, children, adjusting to vaccine requirements and mask mandates in schools. Now, a lot of these children are not eligible for the vaccine, so clearly, the vaccine requirements adjustment was made by the teachers and the staffs in the schools, but the mask mandate has proven to be the one that seems to give rise to acrimonious arguments, I guess I'd say. Maybe that's redundant, I don't know, but in different states and different school districts, and then of course spurred several court cases, some of which are still ongoing, over whether or not local districts can set rules that supersede the states. We use Florida and Texas as an example, which are anti-mask mandate based on their governors' stances about the coronavirus and its spread. And then these other court cases also where there are individual educational institutions of higher learning mostly about whether they have the right to protect all of their students through such mandates. I know my son just started at Georgetown Law in August, and they had a mandate put in place that you had to be vaccinated. I also live in New Jersey and just saw recently that it looked like, I'm not sure if the case was concluded or not, that somebody or maybe more than one person filed suit against Rutgers University, which is the only and it's the largest higher educational institution in the state of New Jersey, and that I believe they lost that case. And I think I saw another one that was for one of the private-owned institutions where it looked like the case was not going to go in the favor of the plaintiffs. So Remember, Jupiter represents also legal issues. So such court cases related to things like coronavirus restrictions or mask mandates involve the Aquarian nature of large groups, which I've already said. Now, much of President Biden's actions seem to have resulted in the kind of energies culminating today, September 16th, through the sun's quincunx to Jupiter, which also represents the legislature. And here I'm talking about the adjustments made as California Governor Gavin Newsom prevailed in his quest to beat down a recall election for his removal. And his main GOP rival was a guy named Larry Elder, who's a conservative talk show host who basically identifies himself with issues antithetical to individual rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I mean, I'm trying to sort of scoop everything into one neat little phrase. But what's interesting is that he did accept defeat, but not before planting the big lie that if he lost the election, it might have been rigged. Regardless, however, the majority of voters seem to have illustrated an adjustment of the populace to support the incumbent, whose track record on issues like statewide coronavirus protections for the many seem to have been top of mind in their decision to keep Newsom in office. In other words, people are saying they like what he did. 60% of the people voted him in, which was a threshold that was high enough for Larry Elder not to be able to legitimately claim that the election was fraudulent or rigged. And so, we'll see where that goes in the future. But let's remember, too, that Venus in Scorpio's square to Saturn in Aquarius culminates late on September 16th or early September 17th, depending on your time zone. And this represents an aspect, I've spoke about it, I don't know if it was last week, but I've spoken about it before, that I call the quid pro quo, because it seeks balance in relationships. It asks us to look at our relationships. The phrase that I like to use is in the cold, hard light of day. And it asks us to ask the question of anyone with whom we're partnered, what have you done for me lately? Now, of course, if you haven't done anything from your partner, you don't really have the right to ask them what they've done for you, right? I mean, maybe you do, but what I'm saying is we're looking for a balance, a quid pro quo within a relationship. So if you do all the giving, like in other words, especially in the wake of the September 6th Virgo new moon energy, which asked us to open ourselves up to receiving as much as we give, Venus square Saturn calls us to balance the equity and fairness within our relationships. And again, in terms of politics, if we look at the collective, we see the California governor's recall race as an example of this state's residents looking at each candidate and deciding whether they, the populace, are going to get as much from the candidates as they are giving them in terms of their support. So is it worth it to give my support to the GOP guy who's basically running on a Trump platform, or to vote to keep in office or power the guy who's been doing things related to the coronavirus, at least, that we like, right? So this is not like, in some respects it can be emotional, but it's based on the beliefs, and some of which are based on facts, right? The sun's in Virgo. We were just the facts, ma'am. So, if it's factual that the coronavirus rate has gone down among the vaccinated and is only causing death among the unvaccinated, then people are responding to that and voting their, voting their wishes or whatever, that things remain that way rather than be overturned by someone who will perhaps change the whole dynamic. So again, for example, California is mainly Democratic, and those who agree with mask mandates and vaccinations, etc., they want to know that whoever governs the state is on board with their way of thinking and is willing to give them what they need, rather than giving their vote to someone who's not going to return the favor in terms of supporting their priorities. And again, clearly, Larry Elder did not pass the Venus square Saturn test for most, and so far at least, as I mentioned, the majority vote tally, because they say that it'll take weeks for them to get all of the votes with the mail-ins and the this and the that, makes it, but it's already made it impossible for Elder to argue that there was fraud in this election. So in that sense, again, Venus square Saturn can be a kind of, I'll be responsible for you if you'll be responsible for me in return energy. I'll have your back if you'll have mine, which is, again, pretty much what every voter wants to hear from any candidate they choose to vote for, right? You know, I mean, do you work for me or do you work for big money? And that's a whole different topic that I'm not going to get into right now. Anyway, sorry, just taking a little drink. If we extrapolate this energy down into our personal lives, we can look at the balance and the quid pro quo status of any partnership now to determine how much we feel obligated to another versus how much they feel obligated to us. This aspect presents us the opportunity to face the challenge of separating ourselves from our relationships in order to more objectively view the foundation of these relationships and whether they're really solid or are they based on an illusion. And again, that's why I use the phrase, look at the relationship in the cold, hard light of day without any fantasy. What you see is what you get. What you imagine might not be what you get. And as Rob Hand says in his book, Planets in Transit, Venus square Saturn is an aspect of which can make us feel lonely or isolated. And it can also, in a more positive light, lead to, and here I'm going to quote from Planets in Transit, quote, a radical reappraisal of your life and to a sober consideration of yourself as a human being relating to other human beings. Now, again, looked at through the microcosm, right? That brings me back to some of President Biden's remarks earlier this week or last week when he talked about, we all need to protect each other, So that about sums it up on both a personal and a collective level right now, at least as far as I'm concerned. So when Mercury in Libra, quincunx is Neptune in Pisces, late September 17th or early on the 18th, again, depending on your time zone, we may have to adjust, again, remember, quincunx is adjustment, our ability to open-mindedly hear two sides of the same story or both sides of the same story, Mercury in Libra, without getting caught up in confusion about what is fact and what fiction, or as Hand would say, illusory thinking. So some of this may, of course, most impact those resistant to things like vaccines and mask wearing, if we look at it admittedly in this narrow context only, as Venus square Saturn leads to a necessary adjustment to whether we truly believe misinformation or not. And regardless whether we must now adjust to the fact that misinformation or not, we have to, again, adjust to the understanding, Mercury, that we're all each other's partners, Libra, in the collective sense, or, sisters under the skin, which is Neptune's domain. I always say Neptune is several different things. There's several different very well-worn phrases that come to me, which is, there but for the grace of God go I, and no man is an island, no man stands alone. So, that's how I think of Neptune's relationship as an outer planet to the undertow of the collective on an emotional level. So all of this leads us to the September 20th Pisces full moon next week, when the Pisces moon reflects back to the Virgo sun its most negative archetypal traits and asks for these to be released. So what are the negative Virgo archetypal traits? Well, I'm so glad you asked. The Virgo archetype downside lies with its quest for perfection. And in pursuing this quest, its efforts to control one's environment to achieve this goal. And the Pisces moon reflects the Virgo sun's light back onto itself, like I said before, to remind this mutable earthy energy, earthy sign of health and service, that only when we can let go can we relax enough to release the fear of being overwhelmed by that which we fear most, which is chaos. So, in short, the Pisces moon, which will be about 12 hours past its conjunction to Neptune at this lunation, together implore the Virgo Sun to let go of its certainty that it must control its environment or it will descend into madness. In addition, the moon reminds the Virgo Sun that keeping such a tight grip on there's a place for everything and everything in its place mentality creates the kind of rigid thinking that often causes migraines, upset tummies, and a lack of truly restful sleep, if not worse things such as irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, or something more dire like Crohn's disease. Now, this lunation reminds us most of all that what worries the mind often manifests in the body as dis-ease. And one of the antidotes to Virgo's kind of restrictive thinking, right? Because Virgo is ruled by Mercury, right? Mercury rules Gemini, which likes to collect all kinds of information. But Mercury's Virgo takes the information, categorizes it, slots it, puts it in file folders or categories, and we take those out and we look at them individually, and we assess them and we analyze them, right? And then we come up with a conclusion. So most of that information is hopefully based on fact, because Virgo, as an archetype, is capable of actually doing an analyzation. And when you're doing analyzation, right, you need to know that you're dealing with facts. I mean, is grass growing or is it dying? It's yes or no. There's really not much in between. But the downside of the Virgo energy is that it's so detail-oriented that it can miss the forest for the trees. So it sees the small picture, but it doesn't see the bigger one. And the reason that I say that as it relates to our health is that when we're too myopic in our thinking, too restrictive in our thinking, and too worried that if we don't do things a certain way, we won't get the desired outcome, and that means that we're imperfect, right? There's a rigidity that starts to develop on the mental level here. So one of the antidotes to and then in turn, like I said, that this lunation reminds us most of all that what worries the mind often manifests in the body as dis-ease. I've seen this with tons of Virgo-oriented clients, with myself, and it does ring true often. So one of the antidotes to restrictive thinking and the illusory and unattainable quest for perfection, right? There's no such thing, right? We're all imperfect beings, is to simply give it up by establishing what we can control, which in Virgo's case is our daily routine, and creating new rituals that allow us to let go of our need to control our environment, which, has to be fear-based. Like, why do we have to control our environment? Oftentimes what we find when we do some deep exploration is that we attempt to control our environment because either early in this lifetime or due to past life experiences, our environment was out of control. And what that could potentially lead to, like I said before, is madness. You lose your mind. So we have to keep a tight grip on our mind, but that has negative repercussions. So if we create new rituals that allow us to let go of our need to control our environment or to be right all the time as part of our quest for perfection, right? If I'm right all the time, then I must be closer to perfection, lies with giving up such control and placing it in the hands of the universe. God, Goddess, Source, Creator, whatever energies we believe in. And if we don't, perhaps finding our way to establish some kind of faith in universal energies. And when we do this, we often realize that when we begin to establish daily rituals, related to our diet, sleep habits, exercise, etc., and of course, meditative and mindful practices such as meditation, or the opposite of Virgo, anything rhythmic, because that's Pisces, right? Virgo's polar opposite, which is what's going on at this lunation, is telling him, you know what? Walk, run, drive, swim, dance, do yoga, do martial arts, do anything that actually appeals to you on a physical level, because Virgo's an earth sign, or on a metaphorical level or a creative level, because Neptune ties us to the collective, to the fact that we're all connected, to the archetypes, and what arises from Neptunian chaos usually comes out and manifests itself as clarity. So if you think about having a dream and then implementing it, or you think about, now sometimes it's possible and sometimes it's not, but what I'm saying here is that we have to allow ourselves to dream, right? Because in the seeds of the dream lie the potential for it to become a concrete manifestation. So if we see or hear in our mind's eye music or ear, or art or whatever, engaging in a mindful practice that has to do with expression through the arts, and it depends on each of us individually, right? Where do we express ourselves best? For some of us, it's Aryan, it's through the physical world, it's through martial arts or some kind of physical movement, athletics or whatever. Taurus might want to, create a new baked product. Taurus and Cancer, right? We like to eat and we like to nurture. So it's like, you can relate it to whatever archetypes you resonate to in your own particular life. But what I'm trying to say is the Pisces moon extends its hand to the Virgo sun now for the purpose of engaging in a dance. And just as the ocean's tide ebbs and flows, so must we roll with that kind of flexibility that allows us to validate that such fluctuations are normal and natural. So if we stick to a Virgo in absolute because we're being myopic and we can't see the bigger picture, we end up becoming oftentimes more self-punishing. Because myopia, right, lends itself to thinking, negative thinking, right? Oh, I did that wrong. Oh, I should have done that better. Oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, how could I have been so stupid? Ugh, what's wrong with me? Now, a lot of us were conditioned to think that way, depending on our early lives, depending on past life karma. But the point is that the Virgoan archetype in a negative, in its negative sense, which is what we're talking about, because the Pisces full moon its point is to ask us to release the negative of the Virgo archetype, is that we become uber self-punishing. And then we just, revert habitually back to the blame game. But Pisces reminds Virgo now that it's all about give and take, ebb and flow, the natural rhythm and cycles of life, just like the natural ebb and flow of the ocean. Not about some absolute quest to emulate being perfect so that we'll get into heaven and reap its rewards in the afterlife. As we slowly begin to morph out of the age of Pisces and into the age of Aquarius over the long term, and of course, astrologers argue about the precise timing of this, but I say it's been transitioning slowly for the past century or a little more. I studied with Stephen Forrest, who one of his favorite phrases is, how do you know the exact moment when a kitten becomes a cat? When you're dealing with an age, 2,000 year age, like the age of Pisces morphing into the age of Aquarius, you're not talking about exact dates. There isn't going to be an astrologer or anyone else who's going to say, oh, it was September 22nd of 1963. Yes, that's when we moved from Pisces to Aquarius. That's just not going to happen, right? But, Stephen Forrest also points out, which I've always thought was very interesting, that the age of Aquarius has begun already, and it began around the turn of the century in 1900, because during that following era, we saw mankind go from the horse and buggy and the plow, being pulled by the oxen, to mechanized automobiles. And over the next, 60 years, 70 years, 80 years, and through till today, we not only, we went to airplanes, right? You can get from New York to California in 5 or 6 hours. Whereas if you traverse the 3,000 or 3,200 mile trip on foot or even by train or car, it's going to take you days, right? If not longer. So my point in digressing into this topic is that as we move out of Pisces, the age of Pisces, which is very much tied to the concept of mortal sin, right? As we move away from that, we can hopefully leave behind some of the notions that we're all born sinners, and that we have to concentrate on the concept of redemption in order to win the reward of a peaceful, happy, joyous, glorious afterlife. The age of Aquarius is more like we're here now, so why not live for today? And that's my philosophy. But of course, I temper it by saying it doesn't hurt any of us to go through our daily lives with kindness, compassion, empathy, temperance, integrity, and dignity, right? So it's interesting because I was raised by an Aquarian father, and one of the asides I would like to tell you is that, I never gravitated towards traditional astrology because traditional astrology doesn't use the outer planets. And that's because before the discovery by telescope, by a technological advancement, we first saw Uranus in the late 1700s, saw Neptune in the 1860s, and then, of course, as recent as less than 100 years ago in 1930, we discovered Pluto. Now, my father was the type of guy, as an Aquarian, who loved the latest gadgets, right? And I can almost hear him saying, he's gone now, but I can almost, gone but not forgot, I can always hear him saying, well, if you have access to that, why wouldn't you use it? Why would you still use candlelight if you have electricity? Like, that kind of thing never made any sense to him. And I've adopted that philosophy as well. So I think if it's available to us, let's use it. So the age of Aquarius is already more about computers, the internet, artificial intelligence, letting computers think for us. And we could talk for hours about the pros and cons of letting that happen, right? A lot is going to have to be done. But with Uranus in Taurus right now, until 2025, or 6, I forget, I think it's 25, we will be, adjusting our value system around these things. Not to beat a dead horse, but virtual education, circumstances have made it necessary for that to have been a way of life for the past year and a half until now, as we dealt with a major pandemic. So change is forced upon us. Which changes will remain? Saw an article the other day too about the companies, and this has been ongoing for the past year too, companies, corporations who no longer want to return to the office full force. Between commute time, more time that mothers and fathers are able to spend with families, to be able to create their own schedule, it's all beneficial for workers. Somebody wrote an op-ed in the New York Times the other day about Mayor de Blasio in New York City mandating that everybody return physically to the office. And she was extolling the virtues of all the wonderful things about having been able to work. She's a city employee. She works for the planning department, and how they've innovatively managed their way around through the course of the coronavirus to be able to continue business as usual. And she was pointing out how up to 40% of the workforce that's employed by New York City and her particular department would refuse to return back on a full-time basis. And how she was, explaining her opinion that this is only going to hurt the city. some corporations have already realized that and adjusted, others haven't, and so it remains to be seen. But again, this is all part of the incoming age of Aquarius as we begin to morph more and more into that and away from the age of Pisces. And that's my point. This Pisces full moon is sort of like just one in the year, right? Every year we have a Pisces full moon. We're going to get the opposition of Pisces to Virgo, which is always going to tell us in general to let go. Let go, as they say in AA and in recovery programs, let go and let God, right? You can't control everything. And when you try to do that, you only hurt yourself because you fall back on the age of Pisces principles that you're unworthy to begin with. And you constantly have to prove yourself and your value, and you do that through trying to be perfect. So let me move on now to two aspects that will perfect prior to the Pisces full moon. And for those like me who like numbers, the Pisces full moon is going to occur at 28 degrees and 13 minutes of the Pisces Virgo axis, as the Pisces moon opposes the Virgo Sun exact, at 4:55 p.m. Pacific time and 7:55 p.m. Eastern time on September 20th, which is next Monday. So the first is Venus in Scorpio's quincunx. And I mentioned a few weeks ago how many quincunxes are going on now, right? We're all in the last 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it's been, or more. These quincunxes are aspects of adjustment. We got a lot going on. Humanity is changing. It's not just the U.S., it's worldwide, right? So Venus in Scorpio's quincunxing wounded healer Chiron in Aries on that day, which brings into the energy of this lunation our ability to adjust to releasing what the Pisces full moon asks us to release, which is our illusory thinking that we can reach nirvana through perfection, and through using relationships as a way to speak out about our wounds in order to promote future healing. Now, I'm mindful of two things here. The first is on the same coronavirus theme. And those who've spoken from their deathbeds, literally, or prior to being put on ventilators before they passed, about regret for not having protected themselves via getting a vaccine. And the other is something in the news the other day, and that's that the female athletes, including Olympic gold medal winners Simone Biles and Allie Reisman, testifying in front of Congress about the neglect of the FBI to investigate Larry Nassar, who's the Olympic gynecological doctor who abused so many young female athletes for years before anyone took notice of their pleas to stop him after they reported his abuse. They're calling for an adjustment, quincunx, to how much serious weight authorities give to reports of sexual abuse. So, Venus in Scorpio right away is potential for sexual abuse when we look at it in that particular light, right? And as I said, Chiron in Aries is the ability to speak out. So as we adjust our mindset now to release our hold on any rigid concepts around the need to attain perfection or to be perfect, we can also speak out about our wounds now and find comfort that others will hear us and actually do something moving forward. The point here is that we needn't keep our wounds hidden for fear that others will perceive us as less than, as damaged goods, or inferior or imperfect for whatever reason. It's when we speak out about our wounds, Chiron and Aries, that one, we cleanse our soul of its feelings of imperfection, right? If we want to go the Pisces route, and open a dialogue with others who've been similarly wounded, right? Mercury and Libra, and thus learn that we are not alone. We have also we will have just an hour before the exact lunation on September 20th, a trine by Mercury and Libra to Jupiter and Aquarius. So using the same context, I'd say that this aspect makes it easy for us to see, and in this case hear, The cry of those who are partnered, such as these Olympic level athletes. I don't know if anybody watched it, but they were very unified, sitting together and very clear in their dissatisfaction with the response that they got from, in terms of getting justice after they reported these crimes. So for each of us, this is usually the Mercury trine Jupiter is usually an optimistic energy that favors positive thinking. So in terms of the collective, it allows us to welcome in new ideas, particularly those that affect large groups of people, since Jupiter's in Aquarius, that broaden our understanding of the world around us. It's also a very good aspect for business because we're able to see all of the possibilities inherent in any business deal, which might require a contract. So signing a contract at this full moon is not a bad idea, but I would temper that because we have the moon meeting up with Neptune and opposing the sun. So, I would say a double, triple, quadruple check all the fine print. But at this time, too, Mercury will be waxing toward a square to Pluto and Capricorn at this lunation. And this is going to culminate on September 22nd. So it's definitely an influential energy at this lunation. And Mercury square Pluto foretells the possibility of obsessive thinking, which is completely antithetical to the Pisces moon's message to the Virgo sun now, right? And because it reminds us to keep an open mind, if we allow and not succumb to myopia or obsession. If we allow one particular thought or idea to crowd out all the others in our mind right now, that's obsession. Such compulsive thinking is not necessarily new to those of us who carry Virgo energy prominently in our natal charts, especially Virgo and Pluto combinations, Mercury, Pluto, Virgo, Scorpio. This may affect some of us more than others right now, but obsessing about our imperfections will get us nowhere but down. However, if we turn things around and transform any compulsive thinking into the kind of deep introspection that brings about psychological revelations, which are, after all, Pluto's domain, the subconscious, we may get in better touch with what lies within us that drives us. Such greater awareness allows us to then gain control over our desires, our impulses, compulsivity, or obsessiveness without having to be controlled by them. So this aspect is a great one for study of any kind, be it psychological, metaphysical, occult-oriented, or those things which the Pisces moon reminds the Virgo sun that they may be able to believe in and use to better our lives, even though we cannot see them in the physical, concrete, earthy Virgoan world. What I'm trying to say is we can study things that we cannot concretely prove, right? And that's part of the letting go of, the Virgo need for that absolute proof. So one of the other things that I notice about this Pisces full moon that I wanted to mention is that none of the major planets are transiting through the element of fire. I'm talking about the 9 major planets here. Some of you may have heard me talk about or quote from Richard Idemann's book, The Magic Thread, which really basically explains Carl Jung's theory of inferior function as it can manifest in individual charts. And here I'm looking at the chart of, the collective, because we're looking at a lunation. So inferior, what Carl Jung called inferior function means that the element of fire lies beneath our consciousness now, and that at periods or periodically it'll break through into consciousness. So I noticed that this lack of fire was prevalent in the past 2 lunations as well, both at the September 6th Virgo new moon and the August 22nd Aquarius full moon. Now, again, the Virgo new moon had none of the 9 major planets in the fire element, and the Aquarius full moon had only the sun in Leo, which is still known as inferior function and referred to as a singleton. So that chart had a singleton in fire. So what, you ask, right? Well, again, according to Jung, who was an astrologer and who pioneered the, hang on a second. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so according to Jung, who was an astrologer and who pioneered the use of astrology in depth psychology, the lack of an element in a chart lies underneath the realm of consciousness or hidden in the subconscious portion of our psyches. And this can result in several different kinds of behaviors because when it periodically breaks through into consciousness, it can often cause a time of crisis for the individual experiencing this. Essentially, however, it's the soul's way of alerting the ego to what's trying to rise into consciousness from the hidden depth of the unconscious for the specific purpose of soul growth moving forward. Since I'm speaking about lunations, I'm referring to a lack of fire within the collective now. This may take the form of a lack of energy or fatigue or depression, or it may reveal its presence in the psyche through, or I would say the psyche of the collective, through manic behavior. So given the current political situation, both domestic and global, I'd say both of these have permeated through the collective, especially this past 6 weeks or so, or 2 months, during which these, what am I saying? August 22nd and now is a month, right? So this past month, as these lunations have taken place, including up to this one we're anticipating on Monday, the 20th. So some of us have been feeling the fatigue and ennui of fighting and have given up simply because we feel helpless in the face of the world. And so we simply hope and pray that things will get better of their own accord. And others have exhibited rage and aggression through more manic behavior. I'll use the political backlash against President Biden's recent executive orders as an example. Many politicians and right-wing commentators have been screaming maniacally from their bully pulpits about the unjustness of federally dictated mandates. That's most recently, but even before, cases in Florida and Texas and all that, concerning the coronavirus. We have also the abortion issue in Texas. But obsession is another symptom of the lack of fire, and that is clearly related to mandating that anyone who's more than 6 weeks pregnant cannot get an abortion in Texas. And so we see the obsessive quality of many who simply can't contain their anger or their rage. And a lot of these people take to the airwaves on any forum they can. So let's not forget, when we talk about fatigue and giving up, how several of these types of people, well known through their conservative radio shows or other platforms, have died since not only resisting COVID-19 vaccines, but also yelling about how we don't need them and that they're only meant to take away our individual freedoms and stuff like that. So we can see inherent in this, admittedly in a rather strange way, the symbolism of the lack of fire manifesting as a kind of bipolar energy, which is something that Eidemann talks about. And again, Richard Eidemann is the author of The Magic Thread, which is a chart delineation book looking at the use of elemental and modal mixes and their abundance or lack. So one experiences the kind of rage with the lack of fire, or one can experience the kind of rage that wells up from deep within, becomes manic, and starts screaming about the injustice of it all, but that falls back into the inertia that's part of the manifestation of this inferior function of fire too, and succumbs to the ultimate physical inertia, which is death. I'm convinced that people like, because I've looked at his chart, and it's not something I'm going to go into right now, but people like Alex Jones, I think he's majorly bipolar. No offense to anyone, but to me, the guy's nuts, And I think there are several others that if we were looking at their individual charts, maybe I'll do a show one day on the individual charts of bipolar people in politics or in the media or whatever, because there are too many of them. Anyway, now let me talk about how, I'm going to move on, talk about how on September 22nd, we have the Fall Equinox as the sun enters the sign of partnership-oriented Libra. And Libra archetypal energy often doesn't feel whole without a partner, and as a result prefers to negotiate and compromise rather than force its will on anyone, particularly, of course, within relationships. So with Mercury and Mars already in this sign now, we'll be moving eventually toward trines by Mars, right now at 1 degree Libra, and the Sun to both Saturn and Jupiter, both in Aquarius. Meanwhile, Mercury will station retrograde on September 27th at 25 degrees Libra, and so will stay in this sign of partnership and compromise and negotiation until November 3rd. So there's a great deal of opportunity coming for discussions and negotiations to result ultimately in compromise during this period. And since Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto will be stationing direct, all of them by mid-October, something we'll talk about in the future too, we can hope for the best, especially where previous negotiations, compromises, or agreements may be reviewed once more and tweaked, reconfirmed, or otherwise changed during Mercury's retrograde period. And what comes to mind for me is that we haven't heard much lately about the renegotiation efforts by the Europeans on behalf of the Americans with Iran to allow the U.S. back into the nuclear deal that was negotiated by the Obama administration, but from which we withdrew under Trump. Now, there was a news report earlier this week that North Korea signaled the development of increasingly powerful weapons when it fired off 2 long-range cruise missile tests within the Korean peninsula. So, yes, that's Korea, not Iran, but this test brings our attention back to the nuclear proliferation treaties aimed at quashing other nations' abilities to develop and use nuclear weapons in the future. A New York Times article from September 12th noted, and I'm quoting here, Iran has come within roughly a month of having enough material to fuel a single nuclear weapon, crossing a threshold that may raise pressure on the United States and its allies to improve the terms of a potential deal to restore the 2015 nuclear agreement. So let's see what Mercury retrograde in Libra brings, shall we? Now, I notice also that in the Fall Equinox chart, which I set for Washington, D.C. as the location at 3:21 p.m. Eastern Time on September 22nd, 3 hours earlier, of course, on the West Coast, there is again only one major planet in fire, and that's the moon. So the moon in mundane astrology represents the people. So I'd say this chart heralds in a new quarter from the fall equinox to the winter solstice on December 21st, when the sun enters Capricorn, a period when the people will continue to exhibit the kind of energies related to inferior function and fire that I just described. So in other words, more of the same. We also have the sun and Mars teamed up in Libra to trine Saturn, a positive aspect that allows the free flow of martial energy, tempered by the desire to achieve compromise in Libra, to promote foundational energies related to the group, Saturn. I'm thinking here about Biden's infrastructure package related to both solid physical infrastructure and what his administration calls social infrastructure, because it includes budgets that cover things like childcare, pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds, universal pre-K, and much, much more. So as always, we shall see. But this chart also has a waxing Venus in Scorpio opposition to Uranus in Taurus, which perfects September 23rd, which could represent a sudden change of heart, read values, especially in the realm of spending money or joint resources, Venus and Scorpio, by way of investing in a forward-thinking future that benefits mankind, or humankind, I should say. And that's Uranus and Taurus. Now, the Aries moon here also sextiles Jupiter, to me saying the people are in favor of such plans, which has already been proven by polling, but she opposes Mercury and squares Pluto. So the Aries moon is entering the fray by creating a T-square as the only planet in fire to Mercury and Pluto, which I've described, above as obsessionary, right? So whether we use this energy collectively to obsess or to gain greater insights about our politics and political policies that benefit us all now and into the future remains to be seen. So I, for one, plan to remain hopeful. All right, so that's it for this week. I hope that this has helped you. I hope it's been enlightening. And I would like to thank everyone again, of course, for joining me today, whether you are listening to the recording live on Contact Talk Radio or on my website page, or if you catch up with it later. And I hope you found this information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week, September 23rd, for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Right now, I'm planning on having relationship astrologer Diane Lawson join me to talk about Mercury retrograde, which starts on September 22nd, and again, particularly in the sign of Libra, and what that will mean for us. So please do join us again next week when I'm back live. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of